What is up, theology nerds? This is Trip. You're listening to the Homebrewed Christianity podcast. And today, my friend Dan Koch is on the podcast. That's right, Dan Koch on the podcast, the man behind Depolarize, which is one of my favorite podcasts. A number of you that listen, you've said, hey, Trip, what kind of podcast do you like listening to? So I've reached out to a bunch of my friends that make podcasts and people that I just admire, hopefully going to talk them into being friends. And we'll occasionally have some episodes like this one called Podcasts That Don't Suck. That's right. And Dan has a podcast called Depolarize. It does not suck. It's actually exceptional. And you're going to get to meet him, hear about what is going on in his own life, career, what he's thinking, his research interest, and such, and really out of his own questions of faith, his interest in social science, psychology, and such, led to this project that is really being presented in the second season of Depolarize, his podcast, where he goes out and interviews a whole host of different people around the election and uses those interviews with a whole bunch of different just voters and also specialists as a way of not just looking at, who voted for Hillary or Trump or whatever, and where's the polarization come from, but to look at what is our identity as a person of faith, different types of demarkers for faith, or what role does a race play in political polarization, what role does theology play in it, and what are any glimmers of hope for us moving beyond and out of our intensely polarized situation. It's a really fun podcast, and you'll hear about it. Right before it goes to the interview, you'll hear a little bit. No, what? We'll play it right now. Here's like a 90-second little preview of his podcast, and then you'll know what we're talking about. Ready? This is a preview of the podcast that does not suck that I'm introducing you to today with Dan.
I love my family. I'm best friends with my dad. And then this 2016 election cycle came up, and it really drove a wedge in between some of us.
Donald Trump's the first person that got us. He's the first person to actually at least pretend to give a damn about us.
Check out Depolarize, the podcast that fights against tribalism and incivility by searching for common ground at the intersection of politics, psychology, and faith. This season, we look closely at the phenomenon of white evangelical support for Donald Trump and the many difficult, related questions that are begging to be answered.
Two grown men picked him up, a 15-year-old kid, and threw him as hard as they could off the hood of the car. And it's shocking. It's shocking. All his teeth came out. He's bleeding all over the place. And they look to us, right? They say, you fucking niggas, this is what happens to you.
God isn't far away. God is with us now, here, now. Every moment matters.
I don't know why I'm crying. It just hurts.
Find Depolarize on iTunes, Stitcher, or wherever you get your podcasts.
See, I told you. It is a pretty sweet podcast. Now, before we jump into the episode itself, I just want to remind everyone that tickets are now available for Theology Beer Camp this summer, August 16th to 18th in Asheville, North Carolina. And you want to get those tickets, the early bird rate, before it's the late bird rate when the cost goes up. So go to theologybeercamp.com and join a 3-day, one-of-a-kind craft beer and theology nerd experience. Robin Espinoza is coming. Travis McMacken is coming. And we have our friends, Theo Sophia podcast going to be there. Becky from Inglorious Sistards podcast is going to be there. And a bunch of other friends. Our friends at Brew Theology are coming. That's right. Ryan and Janelle going to be in his house. And hopefully reps from a whole bunch of the different Brew Theology groups across the country. And some of you that will be saying, don't you want to launch your own Brew Theology group? That theology discussion group in your local breweries right in your hometown, trying to bring theology nerds together so there's critical mass, a community of nerdy goodness. So if you want to have the most fun you can have this summer, then you definitely want to go to theologybeercamp.com. All right. And next month, in the month of May, actually on the 7th of May, the 7th of May in Minneapolis, there's a battle of podcasts going down. Me and Science Mike. That's right. Science Mike and me. Well, I don't know how we're going to battle, but it is a battle of podcasts. It'll be a battle. And, which Science Mike says, Trip, it won't be fun, Trip. I can't battle because of my Enneagram number. I don't even keep up with Enneagram numbers because that might humanize him, and Science Mike's going down in whatever way this is set up as a battle. Though personally, I don't think you really want to see us battle. I told him we should just hug it out, you know? Just try to bring peace in the universe and such. Anyway, you should come. It is at Wooden Hill Brewing Company, and specifically in Edina. Edina. That is the suburb of Minneapolis. Well, hopefully all you that came out for the podcast I did with Greg Boyd, when we did have a real battle, Open Theist versus Process, you can come out for this one. It's going to be fun. And if you are coming, and you're not going to the whole Science and Theology for Youth Ministry event, then hit me up so we can connect. I love getting to hang out with podcasters. And I don't mean that, like, people who listen to podcasts like hanging out with them. So I'm not saying that just because sometimes I sneak out of sessions I'm not participating in at events to go to local breweries. I do it because I want to build community, you know? Fellowship is next to godliness. Wesley said something like that. I think his cleanliness is next to godliness, but, you know, fellowship too. It's very Trinitarian and such. Anyway, I am pretty excited about being there. And last but not least, we have 2 new members of the Homebrewed community. They went to homebrewedcommunity.com and joined. And they're giving every month. They're going to be in our secret Facebook group, meeting the other nerds in the group. They're going to get access to lots and lots of stuff. Like, you get access to all the epic read classes. So, like, Philip Clayton and I did a session on Plato's Republic. We did one on Moltmann's Crucified God. We did The City of God by Augustine, or Augustine, depending on who you are. And then you have, like, a bunch of classes. Philip Clayton and I just we did Science and Religion. Peter Rollins and I did a bunch of them. Radical Theology, Atheism for Lent, Christology. I did one on varieties of postmodern theology. All those classes and all that extra stuff you get when you're a member. So go to homebrewedcommunity.com and you get a community. You get an ecclesiastical title. That's right. We give away titles to our members just so you can impress your friends. You're like, I'm a legit deacon. Because I'm a member at Homebrewed Christianity. And you may say, I always try to get input and stuff from y'all about what we do on the podcast, who to have on, topics and such to tackle. So go to homebrewedcommunity.com. And Danny is a new member. He's a deacon. And so is another new deacon, Ryan Newsom. Both brand new deacons at Homebrewed Christianity. Boom. They're here. You can be too. And thank you all so much for listening, for sharing, obviously, for rating and reviewing on iTunes with a 5-star. And most importantly, thank you for sharing your brew, you know, with that other friend of yours that enjoys theological conversations. And after you hear this episode, you'll say, I'm going to have to go subscribe to Depolarize because I like that Dan fellow. So here he is. Me talking with my buddy Dan about his life, his thought, his research, and the second season of his podcast, It Does Not Suck, Depolarize. Enjoy. Oh, yeah, and after the episode, I have like a longer snippet clip to give you a tasty taste of the podcast. Peace. So, Dan, why don't you tell everybody about yourself? Okay. Other than you have a guitar behind you, and we became friends at the American Academy of Religion.
Yep, we did. We became friends there actually because you were being so kind to me, and I was like, "Hey, you want to get lunch?" And then you just like helped me for 90 minutes over beers.
Well, I have a servant's heart.
I believe that, actually. I believe that non-ironically. So I come from music world. That's why I have guitars behind me. I'm a commercial composer by day. And I was in a rock band called Sherwood for 10 years. And but now I'm also doing some podcasting. I co-host Reconstruct, which is a theology show. And I now co-host Depolarize, the new season. We brought on a new co-host, Ellen Morrow, and she is funnier than me. So what else do you want to know about me?
Well, why is it trendy for people in formerly Christian rock bands to start podcasting?
That's a great question. I really think it's just because Matt and Toby from Emory did it, and they just know everybody. That's how I got into it. Honestly, is I was a guest on their show a handful of times, and after one time that I had to particularly kind of plan a lot for it, Carter asked me to come on and basically give the case to vote against Trump. Mm-hmm. I think I got a little bit addicted to the response I heard from some of my friends. And also, I mean, I think that I sort of realized my ability to communicate, and maybe that's something that I should put more effort into, and could be of some sort of help. And so that was really I have to credit them with the beginning of that, for sure.
And this is for people listening that never listened to CCM type stuff. This is the Bad Christian podcast, because you just said their names, like obviously everyone listens.
No, of course.
I'm going to guarantee that the overwhelming majority of homebrewed listeners do not listen to Bad Christian. Yeah, because we're good Christians.
Well, I don't know. Depending on if you count process theology within good Christianity, which many wouldn't, I'm sure.
JC does, though.
Yeah. Sorry, Bad Christian podcast. Those were my friends. Like I've been friends with them since Warped Tour 2006. So we've just been buds for 12 years.
So
now.
which former Christian musician that started a podcast is the worst? And there's actually a correct answer. Who should just not have a podcast?
Oh man, you're asking me to throw shade, first of all.
I know.
And also, I'm just trying to let me think for a second about who there is. Can I go through a verbal list with you?
Oh yeah.
So Derek Webb's got his show now.
Uh-huh.
There's the Bad Christian guys.
Mm-hmm.
David Bazan is on a show now. I heard, but I haven't listened to it. The Jars of Clay guy, right, has a show. Mark Solomon from Stavesaker had a show. I don't think he's still doing it. Bill Power from Blenderhead, and who used to work at Tooth and Nail, has Urban Achiever. Ethan Luck from Reliant K, The Dingies, etc., has a Metallica podcast. This is actually kind of embarrassing how many of these podcasts I know about. Let me see. I don't think I'm done yet. Does Stephen Christian from Ann Berlin have a podcast now?
I don't know. See, this one is so bad you haven't even said it yet.
Okay, well, all right. So what's the one you have in mind?
Oh, Mike Herrera's podcast.
Oh, Mike Herrera's show. I'm just going to plead the fifth, and you can infer what you will.
Oh, now, if you are asking me in a magical universe where I could construct the most entertaining band to play the Eschatological Banquet, it's easy. He's in the top 5 bassists of all time. Like, the guy puts on a show, and
he puts on a phenomenal show.
And even his solo acoustic act is somehow, if he doesn't have a instrument in his hand, complete sentences are not always nearby.
I have really not listened to the Mike Herrera show. I will say that I have met him in person, and I found him to be very warm. He was very kind to me without having known me beforehand. I'll give him that.
Well,
there is also, can I say, there's something
you're trying to see if you can find out, you figure out if there are other people you left off the list. Now, I know
I am curious, but I just want to say too that there's something sort of pathetic about you and I, overweight, bearded middle age, almost getting towards middle age, mid-30s men talking shit about a guy who sold 1 million records and has traveled the world 20 times over and impacted just millions of people's lives by going, but we're better at podcasting. Like, there's something so deeply sad about that.
I know, but I was using this as a setup to talk about hate.
Oh, okay.
You get it?
Come on, you're gonna go.
Come on. Right. The moral thinking is actually.
I have no idea what the connection is between the Mike Herrera podcast and Jonathan Haidt.
Oh, that morality is something that binds and builds, and so in the world of podcasting, who is it that you can put down? You wouldn't pick any of the people who are somewhat near you in status. It's okay to make a joke about Mike Herrera because he's so far above you. He's like, you are complaining about trying to compete against me, and this is like my 5th hobby. And,
right. Okay.
You know what I mean? Like,
so
it's a status thing.
We're getting a shared enemy here so that we can bind together. Is that what's going on?
Yeah. And we already discussed, I'm nice. I was nice to you, so I like build. So in binding and building, that's what morality does.
That's really nerdy and meta, dude. That connection.
That was one of the key thesis statements from The Righteous Mind by Jonathan Haidt, which is the silent partner to the Depolarize podcast, Dan.
That's true. He's also sort of the third person in the room right now that's not with us as we talk.
The Holy Spirit.
Yeah, he is I'm not going to, I'll stop short of blasphemy, but yeah, it's true. So I started,
I'll help you out.
I started Depolarize to kind of stop Trump. That's sort of the simplest way of saying it. Like, I'll do my part and not like totally partisan. I genuinely thought if I can open up a space for people to kind of speak clearly and compassionately across the aisle, then some people will realize they can be a conservative, but they don't have to vote for Trump. I think that's what I was kind of thinking.
You were optimistic about the power of language and reasoning?
Yeah, I guess I was. And it's not like what I did had any effect on Trump winning. Of course, it had none either way in terms of, I don't think I impacted more than 30 or 40 people in the 3 states in which he beat Hillary. So yeah, my optimism is neither misplaced nor properly placed.
But I think the intuition something a lot of people had, right? Like that, this is like Trump is the hyperbolic, exaggerated expression of the worst parts of that other political party. And you're like wanting to look at your friends who you think seem reasonable and rational and good people and go, yeah. So if we sat down and talked about this, I'm pretty sure you'd eventually want to say, maybe not him.
No, that's true. That's a really good that's a really good sort of entree into this. Yes. So basically that was my thought. And I think that was most people's thought. And I also think though, that there were people, who felt like if we just sat down and talked about it, like you would of course realize you can't vote for Hillary. And then their hopes were dashed when they tried to speak with maybe their kids or their nephew or something like that.
Or just their friendly neighborhood pizza owner.
Yeah. There's usually a generational divide between the people who cannot imagine voting for Trump, tend to be younger, not always, and the people who cannot imagine voting for Hillary tend to be older. And that's partly because those people lived through the 90s and were paying attention during the Clinton years. And that is really kind of the early golden age of conservative talk radio and conservative media.
Mm-hmm. So when was it that you realized the predicament of the Trump event was different or bigger than, something an individual, reasons out with another individual that, and even the questions you had as a Christian weren't ones that were easy to ask, like, oh, this is really about abortion, or oh, this is really about a lying philanderer, or whatever.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, I would say I am still probing the depths of the Trump event, which is a really like a good way to put it. And I want to be clear about this, that for me, the interesting thing about Donald Trump has very little to do with politics. The interesting thing is how it's actually, and it's kind of Trump-Hillary. There's sort of two events. There's like the election event, which is I have to make what most people consider to be a binary decision between two options. Some people feel free to make a third option, but many people don't. And then there's the continued support phenomenon, which arguably could end up being much worse for the Christian church in America down the road. But so in both cases, it's like the interesting thing about Trump is what it shows us about how we think, what it shows us about how we group together. I think particularly in the evangelical church, the Trump moment lays bare just the profound amount, the profound measure to which evangelicalism has gone to separate itself from the rest of American mainstream culture. And that's really different than what Catholics have done and what Mormons have done, for instance. And so, well, I guess Mormons have separated themselves in a sense, but because of their missionary activity, they are woven into the fabric of not just America, but other countries as well. And so that's what's interesting about it to me. And I feel like I am still kind of scratching the surface.
So you're just now launching the second season of the podcast Depolarize. So what was the question you carried into the first season, and how do you see it changing as you start this new season with a different approach and other co-hosts and things?
The first season was more like I'm learning to play guitar and I'm going to post YouTube progress videos, sort of a thing. So not that I wasn't capable of interviewing interesting people, and I was able to get some phenomenally interesting people, but I just started it because there was a deadline with the election, right?
Yeah.
There was like a day coming up, November 8th. So I just started. And then about 10 or 15 episodes in, I finished The Righteous Mind. And so, my thinking sort of evolved through that. It was 40 episodes. I mean, I did 40 interviews for that over 40 weeks. So it was a long period. And then I sort of took a break. And in August, I started thinking about this next season. And I have been working on it since late August. And it's only now coming out. I think I've put about somewhere between 500 and 700 hours into this season thus far. And I still have probably another 100 or 200 hours to go to get to 15 to 20 episodes it'll end up being in total.
Mm-hmm. And so what do you think in the time between, you decided to kind of move from, in the first season, you talked to, I don't know what you'd think of as public intellectuals, journalists,
and a pretty wide variety too.
Yeah.
Like a soil scientist, and
I love the photographer that went to the McDonald's and Trump.
Chris Arnatti. Yeah.
That was a great interview.
He's like a former Wall Street guy who's now a photojournalist and an author, kind of a blogger and journalist. So it was really wide. I was just sort of like, we could find all these various ways and just sort of test out what might be ripe for depolarization. And so that was like amazing. I talked to all these fascinating people. It's very wide reaching, but then I was like, okay, I sort of got burnt out on the political aspect of it, because I actually don't really care that much about politics. And I also they make me anxious just by default, for whatever reason. And so I took a break, and then I was like, okay, I'm actually interested in Christianity. That's what I'm interested in. And I grew up white evangelical. I mean, this is where I come from. I speak the language. I understand how this stuff works, more or less. And this is sort of ground zero for what is most fascinating in America right now, at least most psychologically and theologically fascinating. And so I thought, well, let's focus more intently here.
So the new season includes compilations from a whole bunch of interviews with different voters that represent kind of different avatars in their relationship to faith and to the election and such. Can you kind of describe like what the process was of putting all that together? And I don't know, like what in the world happened? Like I have no idea. I don't know what I would do if I was interviewing 40 normal people about something. Like just in listening, like you hold your tongue and have no like you're getting them to like share their logic and reasoning and stuff like that. And it's great. And all I knew the whole time was, Trip, you shouldn't do this.
Cause you would just start arguing with them. Yeah.
I would like very quickly either go like that. What? No.
Well, it helps if you, I mean, you would do better if you were going into it with like a survey mindset. So I knew that I was interviewing 10 Trump voters. I knew I was interviewing 10 white evangelical non-Trump voters. So I wanted to be able to compare their answers. So I knew that I couldn't just interrupt them a bunch. It wouldn't work. But basically, so the story of that is I started thinking about the 81% statistic, 81% of white evangelicals voted for Trump. And I thought, okay, well, obviously I interviewed one Trump voter in the first season and it went pretty well. And I'm still in touch with him. His name's Ian. And I thought, I want to interview more. And I want to ask the most interesting questions so that we can sort of figure out this stuff. And then I thought, well, it'd also be interesting to talk to the 19%, the white evangelicals who didn't vote for Trump or don't support Trump. And I have to credit a couple friends of mine who mentioned to me, hey, I want to hear from them. Like there's all these articles about white evangelicals who like Jerry Falwell. What about the ones who don't like him? And then I thought, well, also evangelicalism is not the only kind of Christianity. And I, of course, had seen polls and, articles about how Catholics had voted, how Mormons had voted. And then I just thought, well, let's look at some other types of Christianity. And then, of course, not everybody is white. Not all Christians are white. So I interviewed a bunch of non-white Christians as well. So I've got these 4 groups of voters: white evangelicals for Trump, white evangelicals against Trump, non-white, and non-evangelical. And so throughout the season, there's basically like 2 episodes per group because it's kind of a lot of tape, a lot of content. And then there are these other, basically whatever question sort of comes up naturally in thinking about that statistic or from these interviews with these voters. There are a bunch more episodes, maybe 10 more episodes that are more topic based. Like we dive into what that statistic actually is. Like how do people gather that statistic? What are the terms that they use? Like how much confidence should we place in this? And then we talk about gullibility. Are people, do evangelicals really believe that Trump is a baby Christian, or is that more a cover? We talk about pro-life issues. We talk about racial reconciliation. We talk about social media, So it's kind of all of that. It's kind of everything that it's a little bit myopic, I guess, but it's everything that I think is interesting when I start thinking about that stat.
Mm-hmm. And what do you think, is the kind of nuggets you're bringing out of those interviews that a lot of people who normally would hang out with you, vote similar to you, share your kind of moral taste buds to say? Like, what are the lessons you're hoping expand the conversation or depolarize the conversation at lunch tables, family gatherings, at church meetings, that kind of stuff?
I think there's probably 2 categories of sort of audio evidence, that would do that. On the one hand, there's just the natural human empathy that comes from listening to someone who's different, hearing them speak. We have a voter who's going by the name David because he got so emotional and gave me permission to use this tape of him. He broke down and started crying when I asked him what he wished non-Trump voters understood about him and his community. He's from Appalachia, and his community is so broken. He feels like Trump speaks to them, like he notices them, and everyone else has ignored them for decades. and just off the top of my head, I think there's something here about the African American community in America that resonates with that, right? And I'm not going to make those connections for people of color for them, but you can't listen to him and not feel okay. Like there's obviously a little more going on here than this guy's voting against his own economic interests. Like that's just obviously cruel and sort of reductive. And then on the other type of the other type of thing that helps is the actual interviews with experts. What's going on in our brains when we, like I asked an educator who went to Harvard, like, what's going on in the mind of a hashtag resist progressive as they are scrolling Twitter, and like what is like neurologically what's going on, and so that helps as well to just sort of learn the science behind a lot of this stuff.
Did you discover that what makes the world a more beautiful place is large amounts of outrage on social media?
I have found the opposite.
Oh,
yeah. I mean, it's almost like obvious at this point, but the way to resist Trump is probably not to pick apart like Melania's clothing choices, or how Barron must be feeling. That's probably not the way to win over 10% of the conservatives that you need in order to get your policy passed. You know what I mean?
Well, do you think people really want to win, or how much more enjoyable is it to be the minority with very little responsibility for running the government, but you get to like be super smug and give people a hard time? Right? Like, because there are two progressive responses. Ones are like, well, like, Hillary is almost just as bad and we have to destroy the whole system to have a new one. And they're like super progressive. And there are others that are like, no, like, this is a birther. Like, I don't understand what you're asking me to do. You don't want me to make a joke because it hurts the feelings of a guy who thinks the first black president was born in Africa, and that's not racist because of, and so like, if you think of the just the data and stuff, white evangelicals, it's not just that they're the 81%, they're the most faithful, still
they've
supporting
the most. Yeah.
And they're still the biggest group around Obama's a birther and all that kind of stuff. So like the conspiracy parts, the kind of seeming to progressives, the racist assumptions and things, they still hold on to it harder than everyone else. So I think that's one of the places that for progressives, their way they see morality functioning, it's just hard to tolerate being told, be nice and be respectful of an office or the public discourse or whatever, when you have someone that is just so straightforward offensive and essentially like the racist enablers. Like, even if they're not racist, you see them as enablers, and you can even think that, and then so you kind of go like, well, what is the right thing to do? Like, how do you see that tension playing out? Because the only thing I found that's helpful for perspective on that has been the Mindful Resistance newsletter. Do you get that?
No.
Do you know? So Robert Wright, he's like he wrote The Moral Animal, The Evolution of God, Why Buddhism is True is his newest book. He does.
I've heard of some of those books, but I don't.
Okay,
I'm not
he's great. And so the Mindful Resistance is a newsletter where there's a brief summary of actual important things you might need to know that happened this week, but it's built around the fact that practicing some form of mindfulness and cultivating compassion for the other, here you mean Trump people and such, will actually produce long-term outcomes for our country and things that are better. And if you're plugged in to how the economy wants to shape our minds via social media, TV, advertising, and all that kind of stuff, you're actually being driven towards outrage, which just cycles back through ugliness. So if you want to genuinely resist a system that thrives on you playing your role and being upset all the time, then you need to cultivate practices of mindfulness.
Yeah. So basically, that sounds fantastic, and I will probably sign up.
It's really good. He's been on the podcast before, but anyway, that was the I hear that, and then I'm like, yeah, I subscribe to that newsletter, but I also like to occasionally, once a week, stay up late, have too many drinks, and tweet crazy things, and then I'll delete it in the morning after I meditate it.
Yeah, I mean, there's obviously there's a tension between what is best and then what am I personally capable of doing at this moment in my life, and that's what holiness is about, right? Moving towards holiness is another way of saying moving towards right behavior, right oriented behavior. So there's some discrete things going on here, and I think we can affirm all of them at the same time. Number one, is there a sickness in white evangelicalism today, and does it have to do with political power? Yes. Does it have to do with really eroded confidence in institutions that deserve confidence? Yes, it does. Does it have to do with a kind of a persecution complex that ignores the actual suffering of people who are being persecuted? Yeah, that's a problem. But there's also another thing, which is what your guy's talking about, which is if you actually want to affect change in the government, well, you tend to need something like 55 or 60% of elected representatives in the country to get behind something. Depending on the balance of power, that number can shift a little bit. And that's also what you need to get presidents elected and other people elected. You need a larger chunk of the middle to go with somebody, because did anybody think that Susan Sarandon wasn't going to vote for Hillary? Did anybody think that Rush Limbaugh wasn't going to vote for Trump? That's easy. That you've got them, right? You have to get just practically, you have to get the undecided people, and so I can hold those things at the same time, right? And then there's another thing that I can hold, which is outrage is mimetic, right? It's like a yawn. You see the outrage, it gets into you when you're scrolling Twitter, and it's very hard to get out of yourself once you've done that, and it makes it harder for you to do the things that you ought to do. And I think, let me just be real Christian here for a second. I think that Jesus speaks into both of these camps of Christians. Mm-hmm. So I think that Jesus speaks into the white evangelical who feels a sense of kind of societal and moral whiplash, who feels embattled and possibly like they're becoming a minority in their quote own country, which is, interesting language, right? But Jesus speaks into that and says, "Blessed are you when you are persecuted." And then you've got the sort of liberal leaning Christian who's like, this is insane. I don't feel anything like these people who are claiming the same religious mantle as me. And Jesus says to them, judge not lest you be judged. Or, he speaks an ethic of nonviolence, for instance. It can get real bad. They could tattoo Jesus on their face and go bomb an abortion clinic. They could do anything. Your job is the same. Love your enemy, right? So there's a way in which I sort of hope that Depolarize will point people to Jesus in the way that they need to be pointed to the teachings of Jesus.
One of the difficulties that I think the church faces is around the question of authority. Previously there was some sense of, the Catholic Church, how the authority works is fine for most until enough of the Enlightenment has gotten down to lay people around biblical authority and stuff like that. Scriptures function as an authority for Protestants, and denominations and institutions were able to speak with, next to their interpretation of the Bible came with the Bible through the ministers and all that kind of stuff. So biblical authority held things in check. But now you have a lot of Protestants whose suspicion of institutions is not just the government, but it's also the church or anyone who does
Hollywood.
Yeah,
too.
Hollywood or
Universities in general.
Yeah, so then what previously was a communal activity of vocationally committed people vocationally committed to the church, this reasoning and figuring out what to do and what's true at this moment and how do we act, that burden gets put on every layperson. They have a Bible and they have all the questions that humans ask in every culture and every religion. Why am I born to suffer and die? What's good? What's beautiful? What does it mean to be a good person in this community and stuff? And you have all those questions and you don't trust educational institutions, religious institutions, political institutions. Hollywood is manipulating you and you're intimidated by the rate of change culturally, racially, technologically. And that is just a giant pit of anxiety. And then if you're a Christian, you assume that there's some meaning and purpose in God in the middle of it. And you are now stuck bearing the burden of interpreting the world and scripture and finding out what's true. And I think that level of anxiety is seen with an intensity in white evangelicals because they had so much cultural privilege and are losing it as some of this rate of change happens. But that anxiety also runs across Western cultures at this point.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's very, very well said. I would take issue with no parts of that. I think that is, and I think that what's important to remember is people are inheriting that to some degree. Like mostly my aunt is not culpable for that. But she's not mostly culpable for it. She was born when she was born, right?
And nobody picked which sperm won a race and what family. Like
right.
that's
right. So I think that something that was really interesting on this issue of authority, I interviewed Daryl Hart, who is a historian of American Protestantism. And one of the things that we kind of came to as we discussed it is that the difference between Billy Graham and Franklin Graham is that when Billy Graham was at his prime, there was a center in America. There was a cultural center. Evangelicals wanted to be in that center and wanted to be influencing that center. I mean, even the term the silent majority is a nod to the fact that most of us think this. We're just not real loud about it. And by the time it's Franklin Graham's turn, there's no longer a center. And so, yes, there's an authority problem with sola scriptura. There's an authority problem. You know, I'm a big fan of Christian Smith's book, The Bible Made Impossible. You know, pervasive interpretive pluralism. Mm-hmm. We have a problem in Protestantism of this. And yeah, Catholics and Mormons have this easier for one of the reasons being central authority, not the only. And but if there is a cultural center, and if Dobson and Billy Graham and you know, all these sort of big Christian centrist cultural figures, evangelicals, if they all agree we should be here in the center, well, then there is a sort of pasted together authority that we're all living under. It might be a paper mache authority rather than iron, but it is there, and everybody basically acknowledges it because the general society is much closer to what we want it to be as evangelicals. And so now, you know, I think you're right. There's a crisis.
Do you think there's a way for progressives to have some sympathy with the anxiety that comes up in a lot of Trump voters around this, the rate of change and the speed of change? And I'm only thinking about it because having recently moved back to the South from Los Angeles, the number of people who are generations older who, when there are two individuals who, if you lapsed into honesty about it when I asked enough questions and was trying not to be hostile. You know, I was doing my best Dan impersonation.
Nice.
And both of them in different ways basically said, like, I don't want to be racist or anything. I really liked how my neighborhood, like how my community was before the rate of change got so fast. And one of them said, I don't even think it's a race thing. I think it's just, I don't like going to Walmart and half the people aren't speaking English and you don't know what they're saying. And I don't even want to be mean to them. I would have done the same thing they did in order to feed my family and get a job. You know, like he's like, right. I don't see them as like wrong. I mean, they're just following the rules and trying to break or bend them here to provide for their kids. And I do the same thing. So he's like, I don't hate them or anything. I just think that I don't want America to be, like a mixture of all these cultures. I liked it being a melting pot. And yeah, the melting pot was very European because Europeans dip stuff in cheese. And I started laughing. I'm like,
that's an amazing line.
He's like, you don't go to other cultures if you want to have vegetables dipped in cheese.
Yeah, you go to Europe. That's amazing.
And I hadn't thought of that. And I know Charles Taylor used the image of like a tossed salad for multiculturalism in Canada, where the individual flavors of them are all there, and the culture, preserves it. And the melting pot was the image he was using of the United States. And so I wonder if my natural instinct when I heard that is like, this is just the logic of white supremacy being, like I went into progressive trip mode and heard it this one way, but then I wanted to be like, he's actually just being honest about how he feels. And we know, like the social sciences, that's exactly how a whole lot of people are feeling, whether or not they're going to see it or not. Because the rate of change, the signaled difference, once it gets over 18% in any given culture, will be perceived as a serious threat to people who have even unacknowledged privilege in that culture. That's just how human beings work. And it's been that way since sub-Saharan Africa millions of years ago. So, I don't know how we plan on fixing that. So
yeah, that's where I was going to kind of go. So, I mean, there are non-Christian, compassionate, thoughtful people who think that limiting immigration is overall better because it keeps a society from breaking down. We should just acknowledge that those arguments exist. They're not stupid. These are academics, that's not an insane argument. I think that the progressive should lean into science a little bit here. I mean, I think there's a lot of things that might make us progressive, and I'm broadly speaking progressive. I'm probably not as progressive as you are, if we could tally it all up. But as a progressive, I do believe in moral progress. I mean, I believe there is certainly at least the possibility of moral progress, and there sure seems to be evidence that there has been, slavery being probably the most salient example of the last few hundred years. And there's a part of me that's, process enough to be like, and we're moving toward Christ, somewhere in the future. But also as a progressive, it means that I accept evolution. And if I accept evolution, then I have to conclude that Homo sapiens have been around for at least 40 or 50,000 years, possibly up to 100 or 200,000 years, not to mention Neanderthals, Denisovans, I might be saying that wrong, and all the other pre-human, sort of human species that lived and died and interbreeded, and then eventually we get Homo sapiens. And if you're telling me that I ought to expect the average community of Homo sapiens to just be comfortable with a new tribe moving into their territory, that they just ought to naturally be comfortable with that, I would say, sorry, there is about 500,000 years of genetic code fighting against that. I do believe that Christ calls us to being open. I think that Christ breaks down ethnic boundaries, right? I read recently, I don't know if it was Ronner or Pannenberg or some theologian who said that Paul saying you are neither Jew nor Greek. Another way of thinking about it might be you are both Jew and Greek. Like there's a sort of unitive humanity in Christ. I believe that, but I'm also a realist about the fact that it's been 500,000 years. It's not going to be easy. Maybe even the road is wide that leads to people never figuring that out. And so it's one thing to hope for that. It's another thing to pretend that we ought to expect it by default from people. And so I think that's where judge not lest you be judged comes in.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think one of the things that's helpful that Wright brings up in The Righteous Animal or The Righteous Mind is that there's a battle among psychologists for a while as to how free a human being is when they're reasoning and thinking, right? And he says that there is such thing as intuitive primacy, but it's not a dictatorship, where a lot of our own story that we experience and tell ourselves is us narrating decisions that the operating system that it includes our genetics, it includes our culture, it includes actually our virtues and habits that we cultivate through intentional decision making. Like if you naturally respond with pause and compassion towards a person talking, then it becomes rote in you, and then you become naturally you have more pause and compassion. So just hear that that he's saying like it's not a dictatorship or what you're completely determined, but really only like 1% to 2% of your decisions are judgments, like things where your brain like actually thought about it in the frontal cortex and reasoned about it. And when you get that, like if people deny it, that's one of the best research reasons to use Twitter. Like just look at it and go through it completely sober and go like, what percentage of these tweets do you think somebody
really thought about?
Yeah. I mean, it's and then think of just like what comes out of your head and mind and all that kind of stuff.
No, I mean, so Haidt uses in his book, I don't know if it's Haidt or Haidt. I say Haidt, but
I get it confused because of Roger Haidt, the Catholic theologian.
Well, anyway, it doesn't matter.
I'm dyslexic. They look similar in my on my bookshelf.
Haidt or Haidt says, he gives an example of like giving an excuse to his wife, and I immediately realize I do this all the time, and I think about it now all the time. You know, my wife will be like, "Didn't you say you would do the dishes before I got back from work?" And I say, yeah, except this thing came up." And what I'm basically telling her is, I'm the kind of person who does the dishes, except in this case, I couldn't. When in fact, I'm the kind of person who didn't do the dishes. Like, I put something else a higher priority. Like, and I don't even think about it. I just come out with that, right? It's so true. I mean, however, we do make choices over time that shape our character, right? Mm-hmm. But this is what it made me think of. So if we you move back you're in South Carolina or North Carolina?
North Carolina.
You're back in North Carolina, and you might get there
where the city of Asheville is for Theology Beer Camp. I'm just putting the lure out there. Yeah, August 16th, 18th, Dan.
Yeah, exactly. So if you get back there and you say, you know what? I expect that all the people here who claim Christ will love the foreigner because it's in the Bible, right? Let's say you do that. And then you say, let's say now another person is a Mormon and they convert to Mormonism and they move to Utah. They move to Provo, Utah, where 80% of the population is Mormon. And they get back there and they say, I expect that all of these Mormons will love the foreigner because they value Jesus highly. I know they have their own book too, but it's still in there. Now, you would in fact find a difference. And why would you find that difference? It's not arbitrary. Mormon men, most of them who stay in the church, go on a 2-year mission. Most of those missions are outside of the United States. And if they're within the United States, they tend to be in areas where there is poverty, where there is work that needs to be done, and people who don't have white skin. Whereas, by the way, of course, most Mormons have white skin as an accident of geography. So, like, we just have to be realistic, like, about the fact that our experiences shape us, and then we make decisions. And, like, I didn't choose to be born into a Mormon family, but if I had been, I probably would have gone on a mission.
Mm-hmm.
I know my personality. I wouldn't have been the Mormon kid who's like, nah, I'm going to go party. I'm f***ing afraid of God. I would go on the mission, right? And then I would have a different view of other cultures than if I were born into a Southern Baptist family. I mean,
but would you have brought the party on the mission?
Would I what?
Would you have brought the party on the mission?
Oh, gosh. Most of my friends would say I only bring the kind of party that I want to be at.
Oh.
If I bring a party.
Well,
but do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
That, like, of course, I'm totally agreeing with you. Like, the percentage of our decisions, I mean, it'd be useful to talk about the rider and elephant distinction for Haidt, which maps basically onto Daniel Kahneman's System 1 and System 2. You know, most of the time, our brains are doing what our brains do when we drive a car. And because when we drive a car, we're not thinking about it. If we did have to think about it, it would be totally overwhelming. And we would get nothing done. You could not drive a car and have a conversation if you had to calculate angles and trajectories all the time. You could not do it. Now, what's interesting is that that's also what we do on Twitter. I mean, that's what we do in most of our conversations. I had to I was talking with a good friend about Jesus over text last night. And I was I was about to just pile on another answer. And I was like, Dan, wait, let him respond to to the 4 text long train of thought you just sent him. Give him a moment, right? So if I'm even doing it then, when I am explicating scripture, if I'm even operating just on System 1, the basic kind of cruise control thing, oh my gosh, then, how much of the rest of the time am I doing it? And that inculcates in us what I think is a very helpful humility. And then that's really the reason that book has been so important to me. I call it my origin of species, as if I were a biologist. It has changed my life because it gives such a good explanation of the data. And it's so helpful to realize that about oneself, even though it sucks to learn it. And I think that's kind of the best antidote to rampant partisanship on either side.
Well, it also it asks you to cultivate compassion for yourself when you're an idiot, right? Because you understand more of what's going on in you, and in doing so, it leads you to do the same for others, even if we have not cultivated the ability to recognize something as morally problematic and realize everything's not a crystally clear indictable offense. And we all want circumstantial evidence when we've screwed up or put our foot in our mouth or acted a fool. And we too often take this, especially progressives. This is one of their most annoying things is just how self-righteously smug they get about stuff. And, I know I do, and I know myself about it, let alone others, because I can always point to others that are more self-righteously smug than me as a form of identifying it. It's like the way
that I kind of think about it is the way I kind of think of it is conservatism unchecked by Christ becomes selfish, and liberalism unchecked by Christ becomes self-righteous. It's like a rule of thumb, kind of how I think of it.
Well, the one of the things that I wonder in thinking about in thinking about the new season of Depolarize is if you were to take the same type of questions and the same type of mode of inquiry and were to pick the predicament or collection of groups on a more progressive side or the non-evangelical side of the country. If there was an evangelical version of you that's sitting over there doing Depolarize, trying to have 4 groups of people around a topic that are creating a podcast so that that evangelicals can hear someone of their own trying to help like progressive people in America become human and hear them in their own voice and stuff. What do you, like, having done those interviews, what are the, like, what issues do you think are the primary signals of difference for evangelicals, or what topics do you think that it would need to cover?
Okay, I'm getting a little bit tripped up by this thought experiment. So in the thought experiment, I am not a former evangelical, but I'm an actual evangelical, and I'm trying to evangelize progressive Christians.
Yeah, we'll create a backstory. You went to undergrad. Your parents are Berkeley professors in the humanities.
This is great.
You have a shrine at your house, but it's to all the new atheists. But then one day you're in logic class, and you just start telling everyone about how stupid religion is and stuff, and someone says, I dare you to read this book, and they give you evidence that demands a verdict. And then you start a blog where you're going to debunk evidence that demands a verdict. See, it's very meta.
Okay, I get it. I become a Christian through this, and now I'm essentially a.
And you're sitting there going like, okay, yes, my mom and dad call each other partners, not husband and wife, and they do advocate changing bathroom signs at school, and they do feel morally privileged because they're vegan. But and he's real apologetic. He's like, but if you got to understand him, so like he's in this new tribe. He thinks his parents are going to hell if they haven't been washed in the blood. But like what do you think?
Okay, so in this thought experiment, what's the question?
Now you've just hired this multiverse variant of you to do Depolarize season 3.
Okay.
What do you think?
Like, what will his listeners learn, and what will he learn?
Yeah, like what are the questions that are going to drive him?
Okay, so the interesting thing about this thought experiment is that there is a sense in which the Trump phenomenon, it sort of happens to be focused on the right. But like you could imagine a similar phenomenon happening that's focused on the left. Is that maybe kind of what you're getting at? Yeah. Well, so obviously my hope would be that all the principles are the same. That it's like, look, it's fine to be a liberal. It's fine to be a conservative, like in your sort of natural state. A lot of this stuff is personality. You don't have any choice over it. What you really ought to do is acknowledge who you are and acknowledge what the people around you are, if that's similar or different. And then, and like make allowances for that. Have grace for the variety of personalities that exist that God has created. And then say, okay, once we've done that, now we could chat, and we could disagree, and we can argue, respectfully, and we can understand each other. I mean, my hope is that it would be a mirror opposite. I will say though that I don't. It sounds like you think that my main goal, and maybe you don't, but it sounds a little bit like you think that my main goal in doing Depolarize is to convince conservative Christians that there is a wider world of more leftist Christians. And that's part of it. But I would say my equally shared goal is to convince progressive Christians that they ought not judge conservative Christians. Mm-hmm. And in fact, we have an episode that I'm working on now called Should You Stay or Should You Go? Should you leave the evangelical church or stay in it? And my answer is it totally depends. Like there's plenty of people who should totally stay. It's not the Titanic. I don't think it is at this point. And so, yeah, I don't know if that answered your question.
Well, I guess one of the things I thought is the actual narratives of evangelicalism don't
they don't allow for this.
Yeah. That's like you would have to have the opening episode go, all right, like we're going to be exploring the different logics of depravity. and what they sound like.
No,
or
okay, all right.
we're going to have to
here's why,
like what like there's a inherent value, even if you don't really believe it, for more liberal people to understand something and to grasp it.
Sure.
and-
Yeah, liberals are more open to new experience. And
Yeah.
More
In
travel. Yeah. Right. Okay.
because one of the things that Haidt talks about is learning to propose or share the very same things, but in if you want something to be communicated, you have to like tickle the right moral taste buds.
Sure.
And so when more progressive things are being presented, locating them as not on the traditional liberal moral taste buds, but the more conservative ones, actually gives you a greater possibility of being heard. Even if as a progressive, you're like, what? That's why are you pointing it out that way? It's just the right thing to do. It's not even fair. How about that?
Yeah. Well, okay. So first of all, I'm not far left Christian. So I'm not the mirror opposite of this guy who says, well, we're going to look at the various shades of depravity, because I'm not that far left. I don't think. I think you're right that there's a difference. And in a sense, there is something about being a natural liberal that opens one up to the experience of the other more naturally. That's true. And there's something about being a conservative that makes one probably better suited to sort of conserving the good parts of a society that already exist and not letting them be swept away by rapid change. And society just needs both kinds of people. And so, it might be true that like the Depolarize project would not be quite as well attuned to coming from the opposite side. But I would be interested. I mean, to use kind of what Haidt says, he says, look, if you're progressive and you want an advocate for gun control, have it be a retired general. Speak the language of the people you're trying to reach. And I would say, look, if I was trying to convince conservatives that liberals had something to say, which, by the way, I am doing that in part of this thing, I might say, look, the way that they think about the environment is the way that you think about abortion. We think about abortion, whatever. It's sanctity. It's purity. And there's something really sad about defiling God's creation, right? There's something wrong about that. So I don't know. I mean, it's kind of a fascinating thought experiment. I don't totally know what would happen with that.
Yeah. I don't know. That's why when I thought of it, I went through back and forth in my head, a number of different options and then would talk myself out of them. So,
Yeah. Well, I don't have any plans of cloning myself, a multiverse version of myself for season 3. Not currently.
Mm-hmm.
I could be convinced.
Well, so what are like when you're getting near wrapping up the season, right? Like you.
Well, I'm working on basically the episodes 7 and beyond. And it'll probably be something like 16 to 20 total. Mm-hmm. And we've recorded 6 of them, but the lion's share of the work has been done because I did 41 interviews. So.
Yeah. That's, interviews take time.
And transcription, and then highlighting the transcription. And, these are basically, I don't know if I quite realized what I was getting myself into, but I decided to start an NPR show without a staff.
Yeah,
in my free time.
Yeah, but I actually think it, because of the format and such, which, everyone listening will have heard the teaser thing. You kind of need to do that if you want the audience you're going for to listen to everybody that you took the time to interview. Right?
Yeah, it wouldn't make sense to just play 6 interviews with voters in a row. Like you have to kind of piecemeal it and make it thematic, which also, by the way, I'm talking about how much work it was. It's also fun. Like I really wanted to scratch that like project management itch. I'd been wanting to for a couple years. So this was just my opportunity to do that.
Yeah. Well, I'm really glad you did it. And I am just really looking forward to seeing you in Nashville at Theology Beer Camp. And
yeah, I mean, if like in the movies when someone drops off a plane ticket and it's like a hard ticket from the travel agency.
How hard?
Like, what are you saying?
You're still an evangelical. You can find a sex joke in everything.
I can. Yeah, it's bad. If like a plane ticket to Asheville comes in the mail, I mean, that would sure make it more likely that I would end up there, Trip.
Well, I do what I can. The most of Theology Beer Camp is talking people into sponsoring it, so then I can give plane tickets to more podcasters.
Exactly. Well, hey, potential sponsor, if you liked this conversation and you'd like to see me at Theology Beer Camp, email Trip.
Yeah, and the real question is, would we even be able to get you to do karaoke this time?
Yes, I'll do karaoke this time.
Okay, because I have multiple professional musician friends, and they just run away from karaoke. But I'm like, karaoke is not about the quality of the performance, but the heart exudes.
That's true. But those of us who have played, concerts in the high triple digits, we don't get the same rush exactly.
Well, I just really feel like a Disney duet's in our future. You know what I mean?
Well, if it's, it's either the regular future or the eschatological future, Trip, and who's to say which one it is?
Well, at some point, I will show you the world.
Thanks for having me, man.
Thank you.
I love my family. I'm best friends with my dad. We get along great. And then this 2016 election cycle came up, and it really drove a wedge in between some of us.
He repeatedly said the opposite, denied ever saying what he had clearly said on camera. And it was just one of these things where I just thought, what is going on here? How can someone running for president say, I never said that thing that I said on camera?
So the story of my voting for Trump is that I really didn't want to. I honestly tried to look at other candidates. I was looking at Jill Stein because I would have loved to vote for a woman. That was part of what was killing me about not voting for Hillary, is because I was really wanting to vote for a woman.
Welcome to the Depolarize podcast, season 2. My name's Dan Koch.
And I'm Ellen Morrow.
And this is a show where we try to find common ground at the intersection of politics, psychology, and religion. This is the start of a brand new season. Probably will be about 15 episodes, depending on how long some of this stuff takes. All of which ask questions that stem from that fateful statistic from 2016 election night. Ellen, what was that stat?
81%, Dan, of white evangelicals who voted for Trump.
It's true. It's infamous now. It's been written about a lot, and I have been thinking about it.
I have the tattoo. I have an 81% tattoo.
I've been thinking about it a lot, and I basically ended up deciding to interview 4 groups of voters, and here's how I got there. First of all, I wanted to interview the 81%, these white evangelicals who support Trump. I wanted to get to know them better. Then I thought there must be a corresponding 19% white evangelicals who did not vote for Trump or do not support him. Wanted to interview them. Then I thought white evangelicals are not the only kind of Christians in America. There are also people who are not white and people who are not evangelical. So the other 2 groups of voters are non-white Christians and non-evangelical Christians. Ellen, will you give us those 4 groups back again?
This is a test, folks.
Yeah.
So we've got white evangelical voting for Trump.
Yep.
We've got white evangelical non-Trump voters.
Non-Trump voters,
Then we've got Christians who are not evangelical, but they're white. And then we've got Christians who are not white.
Who are not white, yes. So that's the groups. And of course, it's Depolarized, so we will also have a bunch of experts throughout the season on various topics. And we just want to give you a little taste of what this whole season's going to sound like. So here are a bunch of clips from various episodes to come.
Do you think he is an honest man?
I very much think he's an honest man. I've gotten to know him well. He wouldn't have gotten as far as he has in business if he was dishonest.
I think I wish non-Trump voters or Trump opponents didn't think of me as a racist. That would be good.
But I also want to say sometimes you don't need philosophers. One of the things that always strikes me about the response to the Syrian refugees is we kind of know what we should do, and what we should do is help people who are at risk of being killed by a predatory regime. You don't need a philosopher to say why you should shelter someone who's at risk of that particular kind. What you need is to live up to what you already kind of know you should do.
God isn't far away. God is with us now, here, now. Every moment matters. That's the gospel to me.
I'll never forget. They bounced him off the hood of their car like he was a basketball. I mean, picked him up. 2 grown men picked him up, a 15-year-old kid, and threw him as hard as they could off the hood of the car. And it's shocking. It's shocking. All his teeth came out. He's bleeding all over the place. And they look to us, right? They say, "You fucking niggers, this is what happens to you."
Donald Trump's the first person that got us. He's the first person to actually at least pretend to give a damn about us since Reagan or even before that. It just hurts because we're told we're not human. And we have reasons. We're doing the right thing, and everybody hates us for it. It just hurts. I don't know why I'm crying. It just hurts.
It's okay, man. Thanks for being so honest. I appreciate it.
To see my whole town just go downhill just hurts.
I just can't wait to listen to all of these interviews. I just can't wait to get to know these people.
It's working. It's working at least on you, Ellen.
I'm already sucked in.
So besides the joy of just listening to people different from ourselves, which I think you and I both enjoy, some of the topics that we're going to be covering this season are as follows. A closer look at evangelicalism in America, racial justice, especially between white and black church, pro-life questions and whether either party is really serving that cause well, tribalism and judgment of those unlike us, social media and its role in polarizing or tribal thinking, and whether those who hold evangelical beliefs should stay within the evangelical fold or move on to greener pastures, and a bunch more. But this week and next week, Ellen, what are we talking about?
So this week and next week, we are going to be talking to that 19%, those white evangelical non-Trump supporters.
And talk a little bit about our decision to start with them rather than, say, starting with Trump supporters.
Well, this 81% is such a huge broadcasted number. And what happens with that is that we kind of forget about these 19%. Like, who are they? I think you and I living in Seattle, we might have a better taste of who these people are, but I don't think most people know these people.
Yeah, there's a lot of press about evangelicals who support Trump. There's not much press at all about those who don't.
Right. They are the forgotten, if you will. In the 100% that we're talking about, these are the forgotten, the 19%.
The forgotten 19%ers, yeah. I think the biggest takeaway from these episodes today and next week is how articulate these white evangelicals are. They really do differ from the majority of their ilk, but that has led them to have to really think about what they believe and why. And I think that that's resulted in some really beautiful interviews and some really coherent worldviews. So let's meet our voters. I actually interviewed 10 of these voters, but for sort of mental clarity, we've cut it down to 6 for these episodes because it's just too hard to keep track of that many voices. But here they are, introducing themselves.
My name is Brandon Schumann, and I am a worship pastor at a large evangelical church on the east side of Seattle. I'm 33.
My name is Rebecca Markowitz. I'm 36 years old, and I live in Nashville, Tennessee.
My name is Arlen Anderson. I'm 61 and live in Monroe, Washington.
My name is Greg Tomlin. I'm 34 years old, husband, father of 3. I live in the greater Seattle area. I produce for the nationally syndicated talk show, the Michael Medved radio program, and I also do some guest hosting here on some local radio stations in Seattle.
Vicki Anderson, I'm 61, and I live in Monroe, Washington.
Dennis Poole, can you start by saying your age, where you live?
I live in Edmonds, Washington.
How old are you?
68. I'm an ordained pastor in the Evangelical Covenant Church.
So you have evangelical in the name.
Right.
So when we're looking for white evangelicals, you're right there.
I'm the poster boy for that.
This is not supposed to be a representative sample of the whole population of white evangelical non-Trump voters. Of course, we do not have the resources for that, but it is a decent spread of gender, age, life stage, occupations, and even views.